And our special guest today is Ed Dowd. Ed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So obviously everyone's looking towards the markets and what's happening in the economy. And I think a lot of people are very confused at this point. Maybe you can give us a little guidance as someone who worked in the markets. You were a manager at Blackrock for many years. You were overseeing funds. Could you give us kind of simple explanation as to what's going on? I know that's kind of an esoteric question, but maybe for the rest of us, plain language.
Yeah, sure. So we have inflation caused by supply chain breaks, government infusion of funds from COVID. And the Fed had to raise interest rates to fight that inflation. They raised it 500 basis points to 5% in record time in 12 months. And we've been in effectively a zero interest rate environment for 14 years, with a couple attempts at raising interest rates and backing out of this, 14-year QE program. And basically, due to the fact that we've been doing this for 14 years, people have become addicted to low interest rates, banks, institutions, and the Fed, to fight the inflation, has caused a credit contraction. So much so that money supply, M2, as measured by the stock of credit created by all sorts of instruments, went negative year-over-year growth in November of last year. Why is that important? Because that's the fifth time since 1868 that has happened. The time prior to this time was 1930, and the other times prior to that were associated with financial panics. So basically, when you raise interest rate 500 points very quickly, you choke off credit, which is the lifeblood of the economy. And my firm and I have predicted last year that we're going to go into a deep recession in the first half of 2023. And here we are. And the bank failure, SVB, was already baked into the cake. I knew it was coming, not SVB. I just knew something was going to break. They're the first to break, and then Credit Suisse had a problem. And this is a global problem. This is not just a U.S. problem. This is global credit that has contracted, and all financial assets are in the process of probably re-rating lower. So, people have been asking me for advice. And since last year, beginning of last year, I said, just raise cash in your investment portfolios and wait for the storm to pass. So sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll get to some sort of bottom.
When we look at like SVB, so they backstopped SVB, and then we have these smaller regional banks, which people are concerned about. At the end of this, are we all going to be just banking with 5 banks? Are we looking at a nationalization of the banking system here in the United States? I understand it's a global crisis, but what do you see happening?
Well, so there's a lot of chatter about this. And is it a plan? Is it not a plan? It doesn't matter. I think what you just said is correct. The Wall Street Journal on Friday reported 186 banks are kind of upside down on this interest rate problem. It's called duration risk. There's 2 types of risk in bonds: credit risk and duration risk. In the Great Financial Crisis, there was bad credit on all banks' balance sheets. This time, they have low interest rate bonds that have taken massive losses because that's just the way bond math works. So there is a lot of regional banks in trouble, and it looks like over the course of the next 12 to 24 months, there'll be shotgun marriages to bigger banks. I live in Hawaii. I bank with Bank of Hawaii. I'm not running around worried about my bank because our bank is very local and regional and very conservative, and we're fine. But, if you're under the insured limit, you don't need to worry. If you're over the insured limit, you might just want to diversify. But, this is probably going to happen. And it's very convenient for the Federal Reserve because they want to introduce a central bank digital currency. So if there's only 6 large banks, it's much easier to do that.
So when you talk about the CBDC, some people are quite opposed to it. Would it really affect the average person, in your opinion?
Well, the average person doesn't know, I think, what it means. It means a whole new level of control over your life, because the central bank digital currency will eventually be linked to all of your credit cards. There's potential for a social credit score to be introduced. And it's a way to socially engineer all sorts of outcomes, because if they can control the money and turn it off, meaning, let's say, hypothetically, they're worried about global warming and cow methane parts, and they want to reduce meat consumption. They give everyone a quota of meat. You go to the grocery store, you try to ring up some meat, and the cash register person says, "I'm not allowed to do this because you're over your allotted quota for meat." So it's really a system of control. It's real freaks, dream. And the head of the Bank of International Settlements a year and a half ago in one of their conferences literally just said that central bank digital currency would give them a new form of control never seen before. So look, power like that, they'll tell you, no, you'll be fine. But power like that is abused. It's human nature. That's just the way it goes.
One last thing about money, and then I'd like to take a turn to the vaccines and some of the work that you've been doing there. With the meeting between Russia and China, and possibly more people around the world using the yuan as a form of currency, how will that affect the dollar in real terms in the short term, let's say in the next year or two, or are we talking, decades? Will we really see a change? Because if you're saying a safe bet is to put your money in cash in a safe place and leave it there, then I'm wondering how devalued will the dollar be in the near term and short term?
So the dollar, a lot of people don't understand the nature of the dollar. The dollar, it's a debt-based fiat currency. So that means for every $1 created, there's an associated debt. And when you see credit contractions, the dollar versus other baskets of currencies goes up. And a lot of our foreign allies and non-allies have issued what's called the dollar-denominated U.S. debt, meaning, let's say you're Turkey, you've issued Turkish bonds in dollar terms. So they are literally at our beckon. So if we raise interest rates, we cause financial stress for them. So there's a natural demand for dollars as we raise interest rates. That's why the dollar's been so strong. I don't think the yuan and the BRIC alternative reserve currency is even viable. You have to understand, as much as there's a lot of corruption in our country, the corruption in the CCP in Russia is 10 times. And people, they don't trust each other. Putin and the CCP are meeting. They don't necessarily trust each other either. So I think it's going to take decades for the dollar to be dethroned. And in a credit contraction and an economic downturn, the dollar is going to go up. So in a very strange way, our dollar is going to gain purchasing power versus other currencies, I believe, just due to the nature of how the system works. So when debt is defaulted upon and economic activity goes down, the dollar goes up. The dollar goes down when we create more credit, and that credit's actually lent out. Right now, no one's lending money. So as much as the Fed prints, it doesn't create the multiplier effect. It doesn't, the money goes nowhere. All they're doing right now is putting fingers in a dike to prevent bank runs. But it's very deflationary, and we see deflation over the next 12 months. And then there'll be a crisis. They'll do some sort of bazooka maneuver, and then we'll have inflation again. So it's like the 70s, deflation, inflation, So that's kind of where we are. I'm not worried about the dollar being dethroned as much as people like to bash the dollar. The way that the system works, the dollar is really the king for now.
In that respect, does it mean the Federal Reserve is always going to be around?
So I believe eventually there'll be a new monetary system, but the Fed will be at the center of it. The Fed isn't going to go away. The Fed just wants to be in control of whatever the new thing is. Think about it. If you're in a position of power, you don't say, oh, the system's broken, we're going to relinquish power. You try to manage the change to the new system. And we've had changes before. In the 70s, we were linked to gold. We delinked. And the petrodollar was born. This happens every 40 years. So that we're right in the middle of trying to figure out what the new system's going to look like. I don't know what it is. I know a CBDC is at the center of it.
And you mentioned gold. Any thoughts on gold and Bitcoin? I know that last time we spoke, I did mention Bitcoin to you, and you weren't against it, but you weren't a huge fan of it either. So
I'm not against it, and it's not that I'm not a fan. I'm old, and I missed the whole Bitcoin move. And yeah, it's now a legitimate alternative asset class that can be invested in, that it has its own technical markets. Gold, long term, is obviously something you want to have as part of your portfolio. I would have physical gold. The problem with gold in the short term is as the dollar rises, gold tends to go inverse to the dollar. The dollar up, gold down, dollar down, gold up. But if there's fear about and questions about the US dollar, gold will go up. So gold is a asset class that you should have, because whatever new system is created, gold, I think, will figure into that somehow. So don't put all your eggs in those baskets, but it certainly benefits you to have some diversification.
Well, thank you so much for talking about all of these finance issues. I think everyone, their heads are spinning at this point. At the same time, you've taken all of that experience and all of your knowledge with the markets and put it to work in terms of trying to figure out what the heck is going on with the vaccines and the effects of the vaccines. And I know you've done a lot of work, and you've published a book, Cause Unknown, which takes a look at some of the data, the hard data that you have come across that shows that the vaccines aren't all what they were purported to be. Put it that way. I'm putting words in your mouth, so I'll let you explain.
Yeah, so I wrote a book, Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Death in 21 and 22. And that book I wrote in September of 2022, came out December 13th of last year, but there's a lot of new information. Our team continues to gather data. And, since I wrote the book, I was already 100% convinced that the vaccines were causing excess mortality and disability. I'm now 150 to almost 200% convinced. I'm more convicted now, unfortunately. What I found, and this is the elevator pitch as to why I think I'm right. In 21 and 22, it was detrimental to your health to be employed. When you're part of the employed population in the U.S., you're the healthiest. That's just the very nature of the fact you get up and go to work. You tend to be, 18 to 64. There's 100 million plus people that do all the working in this country, and their health is, generally speaking, historically better than the overall population. And that makes total sense. That flipped in 21 and 22. I focused in on a very specific ultra healthy group life policyholders. They work at Fortune 500 and mid-sized companies. The Society of Actuaries stated that in 2021, they experienced 40% excess mortality. In 2021, the general U.S. population only experienced 32%. And what you need to know is that this group of individuals, group life policyholders, die at 1/3 the rate of the general U.S. population in any given year. So that's established fact. That flipped in 21, continues to flip in 22 and 23. Then we looked at a different database, U.S. disability, and the disabilities were running around 29 and 30 million overall prior to 2021. In February of 2021, it took off. The trend broke out. It looks like a growth stock chart up and to the right. And we added about 3.2 million disabled Americans. 1.7 million of them were employed, so more than half. And the disability rate for the employed went up 31% in this time frame. The disability rate for the general U.S. population went up 8%. So whatever, you don't have to believe me, but I'm of the opinion the only thing that changed were mandates and vaccines. So the health outcomes for the employed are much worse. And we just released this last several days new data examine what we call the vaccine injured. So we have the dead, the disabled, and now the injured. And how do we measure that? Well, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has data on absence rates and work time lost. And sadly, it's grim data. The absence rates exploded in 2022 and the work time loss exploded in 2022. So an absence rate is you miss work, it's a unit of one. The work time loss is the number of hours lost. And in 2020, that rate went up, but it was only 3 standard deviations above the trend line. And that makes sense. It was COVID, there were lockdowns, there was confusion. Okay, so people missed work. Got it. Then it went up 5 standard deviations in 2021 above trend line, and then it continued to go up 11 standard deviations in 22. So the chart looks like this. And 2022, if you're at home watching this, use your own anecdotal experience. It confirms what I've been hearing. People who aren't vaccinated are, at work, they notice a lot of their coworkers who've got, many jabs are sick a lot. And so this is a huge cost to our economy. And it's also potentially an indication of what we call vaccine-acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Your immune system's been compromised. So that's why these people are getting sicker. So we have the dead, the disabled, and the injured. And it's a big number. It's about 15 million. We're going to come out with a vaccine damage report next week. It's about 15 million Americans in those three buckets, about 4.5%.
You were taking part in some hearings with Ron Johnson, Dr. Malone. Will anything come of these hearings?
Well, you caught me I'm kind of in a bad mood because I'm wondering why the congressional hearings on COVID haven't started yet. I've offered to go to Washington and no one's contacted me. And, we have the data. At the very least, we have data that suggests that there's actually a pandemic now, way worse than 2020 in the data, deaths, disabilities, and injuries. And no one seems to want to talk about it. That's why I'm 100% convinced the vaccines. Let's say I'm wrong. What is it? Why are we not talking about what's going on? So it's a national security problem. And I think we know why we're not talking about it. It's the biggest cover-up I've ever seen in my life.
The whole thing is just very scary that no one's willing to talk about it.
I am, because that's what I do. But I'm only one person, and I've wrote a book, and the book's doing well, and I'm trying to get the word out. But, I think we've done a good job collectively getting the word out. But, there's too many people that just rely on mainstream news sources, and they're in the dark, and I feel bad for them. They need this information because the good news is the boosters and the uptake of the vaccine are way down.
Yes.
Moderna just testified in front of Congress yesterday that they see vaccine demand dropping 90% for their product over the next year. So this is good. But if you've been injured and your immune system has been compromised, we need people to know it's the vaccine, and then there's treatments for that to fix it. I want to help people. The first problem is admitting you have a problem. We're not even there yet.
There are treatments out there for people who've been injured.
Yeah, there's a bunch of frontline doctors who are working on ways to neutralize the spike protein. There's lots of things you can do now. I mean, one simple one that I know for a fact kind of works is fasting, because fasting, there's something process called autophagy, which eats malformed proteins. Well, guess what the spike protein is? It's a malformed protein. So there's a host of supplements, protocols that are being developed to help people, but they need to know they have a problem, first of all, and most people don't. Most people are just wondering why they're mysteriously sick all the time.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of people who've been sick a lot, and a lot of people, that was a conversation that I had with Dr. Malone, people who maybe had been battling cancer, they were better, and then did not do so well after.
Right, so cancers are flaring back up. We're hearing about pneumonias that are strangely starting to hit all sorts of big cities up in the Northeast. And these pneumonias are hitting the young. And typically, pneumonias hit the old. So why are young people getting pneumonia? Well, it's because their immune system's been compromised, and they need to fix that.
And also the athletes as well.
The athletes, that's a whole... The fact that the healthiest and fittest amongst us are dying suddenly out of nowhere is an indication we got a problem. But that we're not allowed to talk about that either, apparently. But I have been, obviously.
Yeah. Well, Ed, thank you for being brave, and thank you for being courageous and bringing your smarts and investigative skills to all of this, because you've been talking about this for a while, and you were right. Oh, I don't know what I mean in terms of the financial disaster that is upon us, and some of the things that are creeping up with us in regards to COVID and vaccines. And I just hope that people will start to open their eyes and be willing to have discussions. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's wrong. I just want to further the discussion, because I just don't understand why we can't ask questions. That's all I want to do.
Censorship kills, and that's my biggest pet peeve is, why can't we have discussions? Look, am I 100% right all the time? Obviously not, but we're not allowed to even discuss these issues. And that to me is un-American, and it's caused needless deaths and suffering, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely. Well, you can always come and discuss any issues right here with me. Ed Dowd, the author of Cause Unknown. Get his book. It's an amazing book. And follow him on what's your Twitter, or are you on Twitter? What?
Twitter at Dowd Edward, D-O-W-D Edward, and Getter at Edward Dowd. And all the data that I talked about can be found at phinancetechnologies.com with a PH instead of an F. And it's called the Humanity Project. We have everything, all the excess deaths, the U.S. disability analysis, and the vaccine damage report will come out next week.
Well, thank you so much. Ed Dowd, our special guest today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.